If you look at the external environment, a very significant slowdown in Russia, the collapsing oil prices. Also globally, there isn't really a clear growth driver. US is doing quite well, but then the Eurozone is not doing too well. In China, there are mounting challenges as well. So what I want to do today is to say a few things, what that means for the region where we operate, and more closely, the region around Georgia, as well as what it means for Georgia, and perhaps a few ideas or observations of what the country might do to, in this new environment, as we like to call it, new normal, of lower oil prices and sluggish growth in Russia. Now, Russia. The bottom line is that for this year, we're projecting growth of minus 4.8%. The country was slowing down over the last several years already. There was significant underinvestment, and if you look at the structural reforms, they've been slowing down for a number of years. So even before this latest Ukraine-Russia crisis and sanctions imposed by EU and US, as well as more recently oil price collapse, Russia wasn't doing too well. But then on top of that, if you add these additional external factors, now Russia is going into a very deep recession. On top of that, of course, you've all followed very closely. I'm sure you've seen the headlines about the ruble. Ruble have halved in value over last year. I think there isn't too much other than perhaps the only good thing come out of this, as far as one can see, is that what it did, and it's also relevant for Georgia. Russia had this monetary, the exchange rate policy. That the idea was that they'll gradually allow currency to depreciate, but spend their reserves to support the currency as it depreciates, trying to avoid any extreme movements. Halfway through this big decline in ruble value, they realized that clearly that is not working, that they're leaking their reserves and just let the currency go ahead of the plan. So there was always a plan to let it go, but as a result of this pressure, they let it go earlier. And that was yet another lesson from around the world that trying to support the currency, especially when there is clear expectation and even announcement by the central bank that it will depreciate further, that is not the way to go. And all it does, as this chart actually shows, you're losing your reserves. So what we try to do here is to put the reserves, which are the bars, and then also reserves less the expected external repayments over the next 2 years on this chart. And what you can see is that there has been a significant decline in reserves, and especially almost alarming decline in the level of reserves if you subtract external payments that are expected over the next 2 years. So that's the blue line there. Now, I mean, the way I would sum up is that this is overall not yet alarming, but concerning, because in reality, the country still has money. There's still significant reserves. Unless there is a very notable deterioration in situation, Russia can pay its way through this crisis. But still something that we need to pay attention to. Then the oil price. It's a little bit less. Okay, I'll come back to that. A little bit less relevant, I guess, for Georgia, but what it means for the region. The oil price has halved since November, actually, since October, has halved in value. So what it meant was that it added to the woes in Russia. Also, some other neighbors around here, Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, have suffered very significantly. I'll talk about that in a second. What is more important is to look at the reasons for the decline in oil price. Fundamentally, it's about supply and demand relationship. It's about new types of oil coming online in US, shale oil, technology for extracting that oil becoming better and better. So the marginal cost of extracting that oil becoming lower and lower. So there's this new supply of oil on one hand. On the other hand, the global economy is not doing too well. And coming below, demand for oil last year came in below most of the forecasts that were made before the year. Now, changing supply and demand balance on one hand, and then of course everybody points finger, or most people point finger at Saudi Arabia as someone who actually triggered the fall. That is true, I would agree with that. In October they announced that they will not be acting as swing suppliers, will not be supporting price of oil at about $100 per barrel, and then the price collapsed. But the reality, I think, we really should look beyond that and look at the supply-demand relationship, and that has changed. And that has changed in a way that we will not see the $100 oil, or we are very unlikely to see, I need to hedge my bets here, $100 oil anytime soon. I think we're looking at 50, 60, possibly up to high 60s, up to $70 per barrel of oil over next several years, unless there are very significant geopolitical tensions or any other factors can drive it up. If you look at the fundamentals, then the price is much lower than before. Why do we care about that? I mean, we try to very simplistically look at our countries and put together exposure chart. So in this chart, okay, it's not trying to explain it, so all we try to do is to look at the country's exposure to Russia. On your right, the highest bar is Belarus, and it's combining FDI exposure, combining remittances, exports, and banking assets, not in a very scientific way, but it's as a percentage of GDP. What is your exposure to Russia? Yeah. And the higher the chart, essentially, the higher the exposure. And in the Belarus's case, and we see that exposure is about 50%. The next bar is Tajikistan, also close to 50%, because, and that's in Tajikistan's case, these are essentially remittances. The remittances in Tajikistan are indeed about 49% of GDP. And then Georgia, on your far left, it's one of the smallest exposures of the countries that we looked at. Yeah, but I would still emphasize that even though it's small, it's still something one should think about, and clearly would affect the economy in this country. The also indirect effects, and I think in some countries it's even more important. This is investor sentiment towards the region. Unfortunately, when you talk to somebody in London, they very often, of course, look at the former Soviet Union, the Caucasus, and the Russia as it's not one region, but certainly a region that's very closely integrated. Perhaps they think it's closer integrated than in reality, but that's what we live with. And every time when you talk to somebody about countries that are not Russia, you have to explain that actually Kazakhstan is not Russia, they're not linked, Georgia is not Russia, and this kind of discussion every time you talk to people who should know better, really. But it does affect. And secondly, it's a currency, of course. We'll show in a second that the ruble collapse clearly puts a pressure on all the currencies around. The terms of trade change between countries. Also, there is a clear psychological effect on countries that people see currencies collapsing. This is the chart of the currencies around the region. So the biggest reduction is in your far left, is in Ukraine. So this is the change in current exchange rate since mid last year. Yeah. In Ukraine, currency has depreciated by 54%, in Russia by 47% since that time. And all the other countries in the region, including Belarus, Moldova, Turkmenistan, Armenia, and then Georgia, one that's circled in the red, with minus 13%. They've all experienced very significant depreciation in currency. I think you look at the clearly the closer the country related, the Belarus, Moldova, the bigger depreciation. And I think and that's probably one of the bigger effects of what's happening in Russia on the region. The second is remittances. This is the chart showing the quarterly growth in remittances in Central Asia and Eastern Europe and Caucasus. And after very nice growth over the last several years, now we are close to the 0% growth territory in changes in remittances. This is up to the Q3 last year. This is where the data for other countries exists. But I think as Georgia is on many accounts has very good statistics, it's also the first country to show a very dramatic fall in remittances. The Q4 data for Georgia showed minus 30% drop. Remittances from Russia. I should have emphasized these are remittances from Russia. And quarter on quarter, remittances fell 30%. The only other country in the region that has data is Kyrgyz Republic. There the fall was 15%. And clearly what we're seeing is a very dramatic fall in the value of remittances coming from Russia. And it will be affecting countries in the region and including Georgia.
Sorry, the 30% figure was quarterly or
it was quarterly, year on year.
Year on year.
Yes, that's right. So yeah, if you look at the year on year, then of course it would be something like low teens, something like this for 2014. And I certainly would expect that it's not going to be a 30% drop year on year in 2015. I think we are looking at lower numbers, but this is very telling. Now the oil price, and here it's the chart shows on the left if it's below zero, then these are the exporters of oil, and the biggest one in our region is Azerbaijan, where the exports of oil are around 40%. And on your right, these are the importers of oil. And the story goes, when you talk about this chart in Kazakhstan or Azerbaijan, you say, oh, this shows how bad you're hit with what's happening. When you talk in Georgia, then of course the story is different. Then you say, in fact, this is a potentially very significant positive. The lower oil price will translate, and I know the prices of petrol are going down in this country. So clearly that's a positive for economy. Clearly that results in better consumption, higher consumption levels for people. You can potentially free up fiscal space for the country. So it should be a positive. Although, whilst the hit is immediate, when you talk about positives, it takes several years to materialize. So I think this is good news for Georgia, but it will take a couple of years to feed through into higher growth rates. Now, these two tables sum up what I was talking about in terms of economic growth. So the table on the top, these are countries with exposure to Russia, and the table in the bottom, these are countries with exposure to oil price, negative exposure to oil price. And Georgia, I'll talk about in much more detail in a second. So what we have here is it's a 2015 forecast and 2014 actual growth. And so in the yellow, we have the difference. So in Georgia's case, we are forecasting 0.5% drop compared to last year. In Belarus, it's 3%. Tajikistan, minus 2.3%, and so on. These are countries with exposure to Russia. And to a very large extent, these drops can be single-handedly attributed to what's happening in Russia and the linkages these countries have to Russia. Now, in the bottom table, these are countries with exposure to oil exports. Kazakhstan has the drop of 3.5%. Russia, minus 5.2%, but although in Russia there are many other things happening. So if you specifically want to look at the oil price, I think Kazakhstan is the best example, and Azerbaijan as well is minus 1.3%. So this is a net effect of what we started from, of this very difficult external environment that we are observing. Now in Georgia, so compared to last year, we have economic forecast of 4.2% for this year. I have to caveat this. This was done very early this year, and objectively, there is a very significant downside risk to these forecasts. In other words, if to the extent there is a range of forecasts, the 4.2% that we are projecting for this year is towards the upper end of the range. Even another way of saying it is that I would expect growth to be lower this year than 4.2%. Yeah. Where did that come from? And I think again we can trace back the reduction in growth, whatever the level of reduction is, to what's happening in Russia. It's the growth, it's remittances, it's the effect of the currency, and also investor sentiment. I think investor sentiment is important, and a lot of growth last year in Georgia came indeed from investment, from domestic investment, from international investment, and I think some of it will be affected this year as well. Now, on the plus side, of course, we have the oil price. I mentioned in Georgia we have the net importers of oil, about 6% of GDP. So that will be a positive to the economy. But then again, it will take, I think the overall effect is tangible, but it will take several years to feed through to the higher growth in the economy. And then downside risk to Lari. I think clearly there has been a pressure from both from what's happening in Russia, also from the deteriorating trade balance of the country, investor sentiment, not investor sentiment, the sentiment of population. Clearly people seeing what's happening in not just in Russia, but some of the neighbors, even Azerbaijan, announcing that they'll reduce the pay. So that's unheard of. Even Turkmenistan hadn't, not the country that we follow, but they hadn't changed their currency rate for about 7 years. They devalued this year in January. So clearly there's a lot of also impact on the sentiment. And the costs are potentially very high. I don't think at this point, but a further significant weakening of currency because of dollarization. The costs are very high. So from National Bank's point of view, the trade-off is very clear. It's on one hand, of course, weaker currency helps with trade, helps with some adjustment, structural adjustment of the economy. On the other hand, further significant weakening of currency can start pushing up NPLs in all the both in retail sector and corporate sector. That's a significant risk. But I think the bottom line is that at the moment currency is still freely floating. I think the interventions that National Bank has made, the 40 million purchase only this month, and also the 0.5% increase in refinancing rate, they are not material. I think it's more of a signaling that the National Bank is prepared to step in if needed, but they're just far too small interventions to have any effect on exchange rate. If anything, maybe domestically it helped, but I have to say that from the more international perspective, those are not the type of signals that help, because whilst we know the reporting before was about other countries and the slide of currencies and what national banks do, suddenly when somebody sitting in London see that the National Bank in Georgia is intervening and changing rates, that suddenly becomes a headline saying, look, yet another country is facing a difficult situation in pressure of currency. So I think there was a little bit of a downside to those latest moves, but not significant. So in any case, I think currency is at a reasonable level. I would expect it to depreciate further this year, but certainly not any dramatic movements in the level of rates. And just to finish up, the new normal. The new normal, lower oil price, Russia is not going to get out of the situation anytime soon. Struggles in China. So what can a country do? I think this is a very good opportunity for pushing up with reform. I think it's much easier to use external problems for this kind of thing than internal. I think in all the countries that I work on, you can really sense that it's much more galvanizing when problems come from outside. When you say to the oil price, because of Russia, why don't we push on with reform? Yeah, it's much more difficult if the problems are homegrown, because then there are then you have to find who is guilty and who needs to be punished for that and so on. So now it's much better, and this is a very good time to push forward with structural reform, with the implementation of the association agreement, and really in all directions, even some of the more difficult reforms of tariffs and de-dollarization that can be actually pushed forward at the moment. But what seems particularly important to me is for the country to start better monetizing its good name. Yeah, they clearly, everybody in the West, but people in the West generally perceive Georgia as having a very, very good business environment. It's the top reformer. It's very high in all the charts of doing business. But I don't think country is monetizing this, and this is particularly difficult for me to see, because I know all the other countries that I work on as well, including Kazakhstan, that have terrible perceptions in the West, much worse than the reality. Yeah? And then they're struggling here to pull in investors and so on. And in Georgia, there is a brilliant perception, and to me, it seems that what could be needed to a much bigger extent is the efforts by the government to pull in investors. Yeah? And what that means is that in 2 or 3 key sectors, there needs to be a better policy or strategy, long-term strategy that can be communicated to investors. In transport sector, so it's a key sector. So we're going to build airports, we're going to build roads, we're going to do this and that, right? Very clear strategy. And then also the government practically spending time in London and other places pulling in investors. I think Georgia is too small for people just because they like Georgia. I think it's good to come here and start investigating where to put their money. So I think that much more attractive policy would be good to help monetize, and monetize is good perception. And then finally, facilitate innovation. I'll talk a lot in my second part of this presentation about innovation. The key thing to stress, innovation is not about high-tech sectors only. It's frankly as much about low-tech sectors and just gaining productivity as it is about high-tech sectors. And that will be the key theme of the second part of this presentation. So if I may, I will stop here and take a few questions, if there are any. And then proceed to the second part of this presentation, talk about innovation.
You know, year after year, you are presenting the EBRD transition report, and you show this index of transition for different countries, and you always make the statement that, you know, especially the oil-producing countries in your sample, they may be doing much better in terms of income per capita and things of this nature, but they are sluggish in terms of implementing second-generation reforms. So they postpone and delay all the difficult things until after. And it was never clear until after what. And I think maybe now is exactly this point in time when most of these countries will feel the heat and the pressure and finally will be able to do something. And the conditions are there. The fact that there is no more oil windfall, or not as much of it, and the fact that the currencies have depreciated, both of these will essentially provide the incentives for the private sector to shift resources into some other activities, and for people to also get to study different skills, not just how to sell oil, and for the government maybe to improve the systems that exist in all these countries. So I would see this as a huge opportunity for the whole region. But
no, I think it will vary from country to country, but I full-heartedly agree with this. I think the solution, though, will have to be state-driven initially. What I mean by that is that the private sector in some of those countries outside the oil sector isn't simply competitive enough, strong enough to on its own to push forward with this. I think it does require genuine reforms on the side of the state. And what we see in Kazakhstan, for instance, last year has been a breakthrough year. There have been many false dawns. They announce big strategies and nothing happens. And last year, the new prime minister came in with a very specific mandate to push forward these reforms. It's Mr. Masimov. And it's been real. It's been real. They're really changing, and the reason why it happened is you can speculate, but in reality, that was very much a response to geopolitics and what was happening in Ukraine. I think there was a realization in a country that you really need to push forward with reforms. That was even before the oil price dropped. But now the oil price drop has really added emphasis to what's happening, and that's why I mentioned it's better to respond to external shocks. And you can really sense that the country is. In Kazakhstan's case, for instance, the country is much more galvanized, that there is a sense that, okay, we need to cut the budget, and they're doing it in the right way. And there is the right infrastructure stimulus program using the wealth fund, and then they're pushing forward with reforms that you're describing. So I'm very optimistic that the progress in the context of what Kazakhstan is will be made. Same for other countries. I think in a country like Russia, this is more difficult. Also, all of the things that the opening line, they require state intervention. I think even the currency depreciation isn't enough. Sometimes the private sector is so weak that even if you depreciate the currency, and also if you think about that, in real terms, compared to the main counterparty market, Russia, in their case, they're still not depreciating, they're still appreciating. But as far as sentiment goes, I think if they don't do it now, then it's totally wasted.
So regarding Azerbaijan, I was wondering why does it seem to outperform other energy dependent countries like Manat did not depreciate much, and the growth forecast is still closer to zero than way farther negative. What are the reasons for such performance?
You want to add the reasons?
Maybe I can add a little bit on Azerbaijan. Two things. One, the currency has not depreciated, not because there is no pressure, but because the government or the central bank has burned about 1/3 of the reserves over 2 months. So they have been sustaining it. Last Friday, the governor of the central bank announced that they will not keep the peg to the dollar, but they will move to a peg to a basket between dollar and euro, and it will be gradual. I don't know how they will be doing this gradual after he made the announcement, but that's not normally the way it works.
Probably they'll be hit by increase in euro as well.
Now, the other thing that is a reality is that the non-oil and gas is expected to grow at 5 or 6% this year. There's a real medium-sized group of companies that are, if you want, on the back of the wealth of oil, but there is a real dynamic in building materials, in food processing, in beverage, and in retail. So it's not really industry, but it's consumer goods that they are now manufacturing locally. So this may explain why it is not so bad. But of course, maybe this will have been the vision of many of the countries in December, and today is totally different. So probably we can ask the same question in 2-3 months.
Yeah. So the blue part is the increase in productivity. Then the yellow is human capital. Red is orange is labor. Red is physical capital. Yeah. And this is from '93 to 2010. And you can see that in our region, most of the growth came from increases in productivity. Yeah, it was post-Soviet space. It was very easy just to post-plan the economy to move people to more productive uses and really gaining growth. In other regions, this was largely about increased physical capital going into emerging Asia, for instance. A lot of money went into that. Yeah, I think in our region it has been about productivity increases. And over the same period, some of this came not just from generally moving around people and capital, it's also about innovation. Yeah? There's some. So what this chart shows is that on your horizontal axis, this is GDP per capita, and vertical axis, this is innovation intensity of exports. And so if you are going up, the bullet goes up. It means that you've become, well, your exports have become more innovation intensity for export has increased. Yeah? And so generally the countries go up in the green color. It means that they increase their GDP per capita, and also they become more innovative in their exports. Yeah, so that's over the same period. So you can see that innovation has helped some of the countries also to, we call it unstuck, yeah, but also help with growth. And then we, in a sense, thought to ourselves, I mean, we've really collected all the low-hanging fruit. Yeah? I think there isn't much left to collect. Perhaps in some countries, again, like Tajikistan, one example, I think there's still plenty of low-hanging fruit to collect in that country. But I think generally we need to move something a little bit more clever than just moving around people and capital. And innovation springs to mind. I think innovation is one of the key things. And before I move into the main report, let me just set the scene. Looking at Georgia, yeah, and where do we stand? First of all, capacity for innovation. This is the World Economic Forum indicator, Georgia in red. Below the CIS average, well below the Western countries and some of the innovation leaders as Switzerland, United States, Israel. Okay. I'd like to think this is an opportunity, because I think really the message will be that you can use innovation to improve your productivity. And in that respect, having a low base is trying to put positive spin is a positive opportunity. Spending on R&D, again, Georgia comes out quite low compared to other countries. This is again World Economic Forum indicator. This is not actual spend, but I think international spend you'll see a very similar trend that it's, the levels are well below countries in our region as well as many developed countries. Finally, high-tech production and manufacturing exports. We've changed the chart around, but Georgia still comes out at the bottom. This isn't the meant to Georgia now is somehow ahead of the curve, but still very low. And China and Japan comes out with a much higher numbers.
Turkey is behind. Turkey is behind Georgia.
It's the share of high tech in manufactured exports.
Yes, but the exports of Turkey is also much higher than exports of Georgia. But I'm not quite sure whether you mean that's surprising.
I think Turkey is better developed than Georgia, and under better development I mean high tech in the better development also.
And this is about exports, so there are some surprising results. For instance, I didn't even put in Kazakhstan in this chart because Kazakhstan was above China. In Kazakhstan's case, what that means is that the exports are little, and it just so happens that a lot of it is in high-tech sector. Yeah, because this is a relative measure to all the other exports. Because I would full-heartedly agree that Turkey is, and I can just scroll back.
Apparel is not under high tech, for sure. Yes. Apparel sector is not under high tech.
No.
And Turkey is exporting about 10 billion per year.
No, but that's,
apparel.
no, but that's exactly that. Yeah. So it's a base. It's a much bigger base. Yeah? But if you look at the R&D, for instance, Turkey here is higher than Georgia. You look at capacity for innovation. Again, Turkey is not much higher, but still higher than. Yeah, because this is just a question of what is the base. Yeah, and if you export a lot of fruit, in Turkey, then that just drives down your base. But I think the key message is that this really, and I'm not just trying to put a spin here. I think this just shows you that there is a significant opportunity for Georgia to push forward with this innovation agenda. And as I'll say in a second, really the key is, and the key message of the report, this is not about high-tech sectors. Yeah, this is about adopting technologies from other countries, adopting processes from other countries, adapting them for what's needed in this country, and then using that to improve productivity. Yeah, that's really the key message. We'll also show that in Georgia productivity levels are lower than in other countries. I think that shouldn't come as a surprise. That also, if you look at the countries as they progress from the stage where they're much more about adopting and adapting to countries like Israel that are about developing their own, it's a very long journey. It's a very long journey to get from one type to another. The fact that business environment matters. There's some interesting results showing that for innovative firms that's particularly important compared to others. Also, we'll show that the general convention that venture capital, for instance, and risk capital is key for innovation. That is true, but the bank finance also matters for innovation. And finally, we'll talk about how innovation policy should be really tailored to what the country is. There's too much. Every time you talk to the head of agency responsible for innovation in the country, they talk to you about kinetic arms and biotechnology and so on, and all that is, I think, very important and aspirational, and I mean it has to be part of policy, but also you need to have a part of policy that's aimed at lower tech sectors about adopting and adapting technologies. I think that's really the takeaway. The analysis is based on our, it's a survey we do once every 3 years together with World Bank. Beach survey, surveying about 16,000 firms in the regions where we operate. This year we added also Israel because to use that as a benchmark for innovation. And it's a very comprehensive survey. It's not just sending questionnaires, we hire external people to go and interview people properly so that it makes sense. And the first result, really, what we've done here is for different countries, looked at the firms, to what extent they innovate things that are new for the country or innovate things that are new globally. So the blue bar means that the firm produces innovation that's new globally. Yeah? Whilst the green one means that they innovate by adopting something that already somewhere exists. Yeah? And I think this is very clear result that in our countries, in Israel, you can see that the levels are pretty similar. And so on your left, that the similar proportion of firms produces global innovations as they produce local innovations. In all the other countries, these are some of the countries where we operate, Jordan, Central Europe, Russia, Central Asia. Clearly the innovation where firms adopt products and processes from other countries dominates. So it shouldn't come as a surprise, but it is indeed a nice confirmation. And this very complicated looking, or rather messy looking chart tries to basically provide the same message. What we have on the horizontal axis is proportion of firms in a country that only buy innovation. Yeah? So they don't make it themselves, they just buy technology, they buy in a new process and so on. And this is proportion of firms that both buy and make innovation themselves. So for instance, Kazakhstan. In Kazakhstan, about 10% of firms say that they buy innovation. So they buy in technology, they buy in processes. And only 2% of firms both buy and make their own. Yeah. Whilst in Israel, you have about 10%. Okay, my eyesight? No? 14%? I think we're correct. Of firms both buy and make their own innovations. And only a very small proportion of firms only buy innovation. And it's really, I think the countries as they develop, it's first about being somewhere in this region, and then as you develop and become much more advanced, then you move into upper part. And Georgia here, I think shouldn't come as a surprise from what we've seen previously. A very small proportion of firms, unfortunately, innovate. I think the fact that about 4% of firms 4% of firms both innovate themselves and buy, that's not too bad, but what is really almost surprising that a very small proportion of firms buy innovation. Yeah? So what that means is that really what the country needs is to move in this direction, a little bit upwards and move towards the right. And the way you do that is not by building your highly R&D intensive operations within companies. It's about buying in, adopting processes, strategies, products from other countries, and it really helps you to move in that direction. And just as an example, I mean, this is really quite one of many Romanian pasta producers. So there was a corn mill company in Port, so they brought in new technology, brought in new processes for producing pasta. Then they spent quite a lot of money of adapting that technology to gluten-free pasta, and by now they import it globally to Asia, US, EU, and again, so it wasn't something they developed themselves, but this is this process of adapting, and then expanding this. And we're going to make much more of this example, but let's just then move on. This is about productivity. Yeah? So in all the firms that we interviewed, we tried to put them on my chart. Further on the right you are, more productive you are. So you have Israel as our benchmark of high innovation country and distribution of firms in all our region. So the fact that Israel is further on the right means that they are generally more productive. But also we can see that some firms in our region are clearly as productive as Israeli firms, but on average it's not the case. So this is really opportunity to, as we think, to use innovation to move to the right, and I think Israel has demonstrated how you do this. Georgia, I think the case in Georgia is, unfortunately, or whatever the answer is, it's a little bit worse than the average in our region. So this is distribution. The blue bars are distribution for Georgia, and Israel is still Israel. So again, there are some firms that are as productive as firms in Israel, but on average, it's certainly much less productive. And what's needed is, and I think all the story is quite consistent. And you can. It's one explanation. I think innovation is indeed, or lack of innovation is indeed one of the reasons why a country is. Companies are not as productive. And this is really the key message. This is the key message. The blue bars show you the level of innovation or proportion of firms in those sectors that innovate. So on the left you have high-tech sector, medium-tech and low-tech sectors. Not surprisingly, blue bars in high-tech sectors are higher, because in high-tech sectors more firms innovate. That's very clear. What's much more, if not surprising than telling, is that the line shows you the value of innovation. Yeah? And the value of innovation, in fact, is much higher in low-tech sectors. What that means, if you compare firms that innovate and that don't innovate, the value in low-tech sectors is indeed higher than in high-tech sectors. And I think that's very telling, and that's really the key. So as I'm concerned, if I'm condensing the entire report down to a few sentences, this is one of the key insights of the report, because innovation is as much about low-tech sectors as it is about high-tech sectors. And just to show you one more example, the steel producer in Russia, it's certainly not a super high-tech sector, high-tech producer, adopted a new process which was well known in other countries. It's nothing new globally, pulverized coal injection, and reducing their gas consumption by 70%. So it's a local innovation, showing how firms can become much more connected. Now, what determines innovation? Many things. It's the size of firms. There are many firm-related factors that determine that. But what I want to spend a little bit more time on is actually the external factors and the business environment. This is the survey you've seen that the firms are asked about what are the main business obstacles to doing business that they face. So, finance, corruption, and so on. But here we've plotted them along the horizontal line. These are non-innovators. Along the vertical lines are innovators. So what it essentially means is that if the problem is above the line, then it matters more for innovators. Yeah? And what's very clear is that all of these obstacles are reasonably similar. They matter a little bit more for innovation, but things like skills, corruption, and finance, they matter particularly for innovators. So what that means is that if you have problems in your business environment, there'll be much bigger problems for firms that innovate than firms that don't innovate. Again, it comes back to, of course, why we want to have a good business environment. I think this is this really tells its own story. Why across countries where we operate, for sure, why innovation is held back. I think this is one of the very important reasons why there isn't more innovation. And it's a little bit less of a problem in Georgia than in many other countries, but still, I think this is relevant here. Now, funding innovation. Usually people think about innovation and they immediately think about risk capital, they think about venture capital, private equity, also other equity investments. And that is true. And I put in Georgia here as just to provide the context. In terms of risk capital, it actually does, certainly the level is still much lower than in many other countries, but it's not as bad as in other metrics. But this is really just provide context. What is much more important, I think, is the message on bank finance. People don't associate bank finance with innovation, but I think, again, it fits the story of a lot of sectors. Yeah. So here we have the blue, please take it. The pink are the firms that with no credit demand, but then the red ones are those that are constrained, that don't get the money they need. And the blue ones are the ones that get the money they need. And we in survey, there's a way of asking these questions, that whether you ask for credit, whether you're refused, why did you ask? And the height of the bar shows the level of innovation, how many of these firms innovate. And again, it shows that, so this is the product innovation, this is process innovation. So for product innovation, firms are constrained, the level of innovation is lower than the firms are not constrained. I mean, when I see this, my immediate question is which way the causality goes there, but certainly there is a relationship between the two. That firms that have better access to finance also innovate more. I think that's important. Finally, policies for innovation. One of the key insights is that they really need to be tailored to the countries. Tailored to the countries. Not a bad starting point is to look at the conditions for innovation. So this is a chart that shows you some of the key dimensions for innovation: institutions, markets, technology, absorptive capacity, creative capacity. And we try and plug in Georgia, which is in the red color, and then Israel and Germany. The further out you are, the better you're doing in this dimension. So Georgia's not doing too well, it's inside. But what's important is that on some of the parameters, like creative capacity, is doing particularly badly. Yeah? So I think when you develop your strategy for developing innovation, you need to have those kind of inputs, and this is just one. There are many others inputs in mind when you try and tailor your policy. What unfortunately happens is that when you look across the countries, and here we looked at all the countries we operate, and we asked policymakers what are the key policies that they support. A little more granularity, policies that you think are highly important, this is the blue, and policies that are important, this is the red. And in almost every country, competitive funding R&D, support of technology transfer, incentives for science-industry relationships. Those are the policies in almost every country. It's almost as if a consultant goes around countries and tells the same thing to everybody, and they want to do it. It's not quite as bad as that, but I think there's far too much commonality in the way people see it. As I said at the beginning, I think whenever you talk to the Agency for Innovation, they talk about these very high-tech things, kinetics and so on, which is good. But strategies need to be, I believe, much more tailored. The same about sectors. You ask people which are the sectors, and there are these very sexy sectors, ITC, energy, biotechnology, that everybody talks about as priority sectors. Again, I think I have absolutely nothing against, quite the contrary, of people supporting these sectors, but there need to be policies also for supporting adoption and adoption in lower tech sectors. I think that's really what's missing currently. Just a few examples to lighten, not really lighten this up, but still. In Finland, again, it's about the vertical and horizontal policies. Finland is famous for its knowledge centers. I think they have an excellent knowledge centers that link up industry, academia, research, and so on. And they're really moving towards phasing out government support for that, and really a good model that works for that particular country in that particular environment. Turkey, here we had a discussion about Turkey's exports. Smart specialization. An interesting example in East Marmara, which I'm pronouncing it correctly. It's the automotive cluster there. I believe it started from the tire factory, and with some clever policies that developed a very vibrant automotive cluster. That's a vertical policy, if you like, which they've very successfully implemented. Israel VC program, I think it's cited very often as a very successful way for the government to support venture capital funds, venture capital investments. There it's all about structuring in the right way that gives the right incentives to the companies that can be then transferred into a much more commercial basis. I think it's not dissimilar how EBRD likes to operate in that field as well. So I think the bottom line of all of this is you need willing firms. You certainly need the market or the population of firms that operate. You need a government that first and foremost, I think, understands and accepts where the country is in this journey, if you like, from across the innovation curve, and then develops policies that are targeted exactly at where it needs to be. I think Georgia is firmly in this adopting and adapting phase. Yeah? So I think what the policies should do, in very general terms, I think it certainly wouldn't want a government to adopt exactly these policies. So I think in very general terms, this is still about business environment, horizontal policies of improving business environment, reducing corruption, and so on. It's about helping firms to access international technology. And again, I think this is something that Bruno spent his time trying to do to get the FDI in, or helping firms, local firms, to buy in better technologies, state-of-the-art technologies that are not ahead of the curve globally, but are at least close to the curve, so that they can help these companies push forward. Promoting smart specialization, and I've highlighted one more from the other part, which is the venture capital and private equity. I think that I see as important here as well, although it's much more into this falls in category for more developed countries. I think is important. And then as country moves further, I think then you can start thinking about highly specialized human capital, developing niche know-how, key aspects of business environment, much more targeted changes in business environment, taxation that facilitates innovation. I think all of these things are a little bit further down the line. So that's basically it. But before I let you go, I thought I need to leave you with something that, again, something a little bit more tangible. And this is agriculture sector. I think we all know agriculture sector. So what does the Facebook and farming have in common? I mean, I'm not quite qualified to comment on that. I have no Facebook page, but I can still have a go at this. You would think agriculture is one of the most basic activities. Low technology, although now we may have high technology equipment, but it still doesn't strike you as high technology sector. And what has been happening over recent months or probably years, better put it that way, there's much more digital technologies coming into this. There's much more cloud-based software. Yeah? This is taking data, taking metadata, for instance. Taking observations from satellites, taking all the other data, it's big data sets. Yeah? And then using software to help farmers deciding on inputs. For instance, yeah? How to use fertilizer, those kind of things. All sorts of decisions about using inputs, of minimizing risks of their activities. And then there's also sensory-based equipment. Yeah, so this is putting, for instance, sensors on your equipment, putting sensors on your cows as well, if you go that far. And what's interesting, I mean, this is tremendously useful, but then importantly, it's useful both for smaller producers as well as for large producers. So different type of benefits coming into that, but because of the way the technology these days is moving, a lot of this is about paying fee for using it. Yeah, so you don't need to invest hugely into a very sophisticated big computer. You have your normal desktop or laptop, and you basically use cloud-based solutions that have data there and some proprietary algorithms that work on the data, but then gives you input into your decision making. So it's something that can be used by small farmers. Although arguably the biggest benefits of this come to the larger farms, where you don't know what's happening other than your farm, and then you can use very nice algorithms and technology to understand much better how to manage such farms. And I think that again, I think this is going to have huge benefits in the countries where we operate over the next several years. I firmly believe that that will be the case. And it's not just farming; it's also the people in the value chain that use farming, that use supplies from farms, that will benefit from this technology. And I think, just as a parting shot, I think this is again one more potential thought that when you design your government policy and facilitating innovation, perhaps I think the agriculture sector isn't such a bad idea. That you try and help agriculture sector here in Georgia as well through this innovation. Okay, just a thought. Okay, I'll leave it here, but if there are any questions, more than happy.
In September of last year, September 2014, the Georgian government introduced some new regulations concerning foreigners' presence in this country. And basically, it became much more difficult to come in and contribute. And you also showed a slide about the Lipetsk. That's a bit far behind. There's the Lipetsk steel plant, which introduced new technology and saved 70% of its production cost. Now, Georgia happens to have a similar enterprise called the Rustavi Steel Factory, which is a Soviet-era giant. Now, this plant happened to be owned now by a private company, which over the last couple of years tried to introduce new technology with an investment of $15 million. Created lots of jobs, but as it is a steel producing plant, you can imagine that it needs quite a bit of foreign expertise for that, which incidentally comes from Donetsk. Donetsk. It comes from Donetsk. That's where the best steel workers come from. Now, all of a sudden, in September of 2014, it became much more difficult for this company to hire and maintain these people. So for basically 4 months, the company was running amok around all the agencies in Georgia just to try and keep their Ukrainian engineers and technology gurus on the ground in Georgia, keep their families, keep their kids, and tries to do what they wanted to do, to introduce a new production process. This is not the end of the story. They managed by going all the way to the prime minister. So they had to go to the prime minister to solve their stupid problem of how to keep their Ukrainian skilled labor. Later in the year, in November and December of 14, these guys finally found an investment bank in China that was willing to put in another, I don't want to say the amount, big bucks into modernizing the plant, which would be equivalent to what the Lipitz guys did. So basically completely changing the technology and moving to a new phase with export potential and you name it. What happens? Imagine what happens. These guys have to come to Georgia, and they're Chinese. They have to get visas in the Georgian embassy in Beijing, and they get denied. The visa is denied. They cannot come. Again, they're starting running letters, meetings. It goes away again all the way to the prime minister, just to get these guys to come to Georgia to visit the plant, to have a meeting, to discuss an investment project, and just make it happen. So I think this is unimaginable.
What's the result?
Well, they managed. But again, I know we have these wonderful policy recommendations, like a long list of things you have to do this and do that, and make sure there is labor, and make sure there is a VC and another capital and no corruption. But there are so simple things you just don't do. Don't shoot yourself in the foot. Don't prevent your firms and your country don't make it difficult for them to adopt new technology and to bring investors. That's it. It starts with that.
Kazakhstan was very clever, actually. So they're historically very difficult to access. Yeah, it's a Central Asian country in terms of visas. And then last year they said, look, for the 10 countries with the biggest FDI, we're going to give a visa-free regime. Yeah, no questions asked. You arrive at the airport, you get your stamp, you go. Yeah? And now they're extending it to any other, well, the same countries can apply, so we want to see who they're going to give it to. But I full-heartedly agree that it seems like such a small thing, but it's tremendously powerful if you can improve visa regime or visa-free regime, at least for, limited to saying come for 2 weeks max at the time, whatever, but there needs to be those kind of things. So I wholeheartedly second it. So.
Since I arrived to Georgia, thank you, I was thinking, okay, this is a relatively small country, 3.5 million people, no natural resources, surrounded by hostile neighbors. Can we think of a good example of a country in that conditions that is successful?
Israel.
And that's Israel.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's Israel. With the only difference is that Israel does not even have soil for agriculture. And now it's a success in productivity.
Not even water.
And not even water. And actually, Israel is the most successful exporter of irrigation systems. Maybe because you don't have water. What I wanted to say is, and it's related also to the question on Georgia, where are the policies? Yeah? And where they are, and you were mentioning the strategy 2020, which is not really a strategy, it's a vision that we can only agree. Right? It's probably 50 pages of good intentions rather than a strategy. Well, it's better than nothing, because at least we all know where we need to go. But through the slides that Tagus was presenting, and the ones where you see that Georgia is lagging behind, there is one very important, which is skills and education. And I think the strategy 2020 captures very well the need of enhancing the skills. And what you are doing in this institute, you are contributing to that. And this is very much needed. So hopefully the generation that will go out of this school will be able to make decisions on visas or policies or priorities for the country. Because I think there are many good reasons for Georgia to be successful, but there is lots of shooting of the foot, as you were.